The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. when Cassius Clay realized he couldn't sleep because he was afraid of who he might wake up as. The Quran lay on the hotel room desk where Malcolm X had left it 6 hours earlier, its leather cover worn smooth by countless hands. Clay had been staring at it from the bed for the past 47 minutes, watching how the neon light from a hotel sign outside made the gold Arabic lettering seem to pulse like a heartbeat. Room 1247 of the Park Sheraton in Manhattan smelled like disinfectant and the lingering smoke from Malcolm's cigarettes. The radiator hissed in the corner, and somewhere down the hall, a television played The Tonight Show to an empty room. Clay could hear every sound, the building settling, cars passing on the street below, his own breathing, as if his senses had been stripped raw. The dinner conversation with Malcolm played his mind like a broken record. They'd sat in a corner booth at Sardi's, Malcolm picking at a salad, while Clay devoured a steak that cost more than most people made in a day. The restaurant buzzed with Broadway types and society people, none of them paying attention to the two black men discussing the future of America over expensive wine. "You know what your problem is, Cassius," Malcolm had said, leaning forward so his voice wouldn't carry at other tables. "You think being heavyweight champion is the biggest thing that can happen to a man, but it's not even close." Clay had laughed, the kind of easy, confident laugh that had made him famous. What's bigger than being the most recognized face on the planet? Malcolm's eyes had gone serious in that way that made Clay's stomach tighten. Being the most authentic soul on the planet. Now, alone in the dark hotel room, those words felt like prophecy. Clay sat up, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed. The floorboards creaked under his weight, and for a moment he froze, listening to see if the sound had disturbed anyone. But the hotel was full of strangers who didn't know that the heavyweight champion of the world was having the most important conversation of his life with himself. The carpet was rough under his bare feet as he walked the 8 steps to the desk. He'd counted them 3 times already during his pacing earlier in the evening, after Malcolm had left and before Clay had tried and failed to sleep. 8 steps from the bed to the book that might change everything. Up close. The Quran looked smaller than it had from across the room, but somehow more substantial. The cover was midnight blue, almost black in the dim light, and the gold lettering spelled words he couldn't read but somehow understood. Clay could see fingerprints on the leather, evidence of other hands that had held these same pages, other hearts that had wrestled with these same words. His hand hovered over the book for a long moment. He thought about his mother, Odessa, back in Louisville, probably asleep in the house he'd bought for her after winning the title. She'd raised him Baptist, taken him to church every Sunday at Mount Zion Baptist Church, where Reverend Coleman preached about Jesus and salvation and the promise of heaven for the righteous. What would she say when she found out her son had found God in Arabic instead of English? Malcolm had placed a book there after dinner, setting it down with the casual certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. "Just read it," he'd said, already reaching for his coat. "Don't think about what it means for your career or what the newspapers will say. Don't think about what your promoters will do or how the boxing commission will react. Just read it." Clay's fingers finally made contact with the leather. It was warm, as if it had been sitting in sunlight instead of under the cold hotel room light. He lifted the cover slowly, the way he might handle an unexploded bomb. The first page was covered in Arabic script that flowed like water across cream-colored paper. Clay couldn't read a word of it, but something about the shapes of the letters made his chest tighten. The script was beautiful in a way he'd never associated with religious text, not the harsh black print of the King James Bible he'd grown up with, but something that looked almost like art, like someone had turned prayer into visual music. Below the Arabic, English translation began with words that seemed to jump off the page. "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful." Clay had been raised Baptist in Louisville, had sat through enough Sunday services to know the cadence of prayer and the weight of sacred words. But this felt different. This felt like someone speaking directly to him across centuries, across languages, across every barrier that had ever been built between one human being and another. The pages were thin but substantial, the kind of paper that would outlast the hands holding it. Clay turned them carefully, aware that he was handling something that people had died to protect, had lived to spread. Each page seemed to contain more than just words. There was history here, wisdom that had survived empires and wars and the rise and fall of civilization. He turned to a random page deeper in the book, his movements careful and deliberate. Verse 2:286 caught his eye. Allah does not burden a soul beyond what it can bear. Clay read the line 3 times, each reading making it feel more personal than universal. Outside, a police siren wailed past the hotel, and Clay found himself wondering if Allah, if God, if whatever force moved the world, had been watching when Clay first stepped into a boxing ring at age 12, had been watching when Cassius Clay Sr. brought his son to the Columbia gym after someone stole the boy's bicycle, had been watching when 12-year-old Cassius told Joe Martin he wanted to whoop whoever took his bike, and Joe Martin said, "Well, you better learn how to fight first," had been watching when Clay won the gold medal in Rome, standing on that podium with the anthem playing and thinking he was on top of the world, had been watching when Clay knocked out Sonny Liston and became champion at 22, young and pretty, and convinced that being the best fighter meant being the best man, had been watching and waiting for this moment in this room. Clay sank into the desk chair, the Quran still open in his hands. The chair was too small for his frame, designed for businessmen and tourists, not heavyweight fighters whose shoulders could fill a doorway. But somehow the discomfort felt appropriate. Like this wasn't supposed to be easy, he kept reading, his eyes moving from Arabic to English and back again, trying to hear the music in words he couldn't pronounce. Page after page of guidance and challenge, of calls to righteousness and warnings against pride. Clay had always been proud. Proud of his speed, his talent, his beauty, his big mouth that could sell tickets and intimidate opponents. "I am the greatest," he'd been saying for years, and most of the time he believed it. But here was a book telling him that pride without purpose was empty, that strength without submission was weakness. Chapter 49, verse 13. "O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female, and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is the most righteous of you." Clay's hands began to shake slightly as he read. Not from fear, exactly, but from recognition. This wasn't just about religion or ritual or finding another way to pray. This was about becoming someone else entirely. Someone who measured himself not against other fighters or other famous people, but against an infinite standard that would never lower its expectations. The clock now read 3:41 a.m. Clay could feel something shifting inside him, like tectonic plates moving beneath the surface of the earth. He thought about his name, Cassius Marcellus Clay, Jr., named after a Kentucky politician who'd owned slaves and then freed them, a man who'd been both part of the problem and part of the solution. The name had served him well, had looked good on boxing posters, and sounded good when ring announcers called out before fights. But sitting here with this book in his hands, Clay felt the name starting to feel too small, like a jacket he'd outgrown. Without noticing, he remembered the conversation with his father last month, Cassius Sr. drunk on bourbon and bitter about his son's association with those Muslims. His father had painted signs for a living, beautiful hand-lettered advertisements for Louisville businesses, but he'd never painted anything as lasting as the name he'd given his son. "That name's got history, boy," his father had said. "Clay men been in Kentucky for generations. You throw that away. You throw away everything that made you. But what if everything that made him wasn't enough? What if Cassius Clay Jr. was just the beginning of who he was supposed to become?" Clay turned more pages, reading verses about Moses and Jesus and Muhammad, about struggles between faith and worldly concern, about the difficulty and necessity of choosing the harder path. Chapter 2:155. "And certainly we shall test you with something of fear, hunger, loss of wealth, lives, and fruits, but give glad tidings to the patient." Clay closed his eyes and tried to imagine what patience meant for a man who'd made his living being faster than everyone else. In the ring, patience was a luxury he'd never been able to afford. Boxing was about split-second decisions, about seeing an opening and exploiting it before your opponent realized what was happening. But this book seemed to be asking for a different kind of patience, the patience to become someone slowly, deliberately, even if it meant losing things along the way. What did submission mean for someone whose entire identity was built on dominance? Every night before a fight, Clay stood in front of arena crowds and told them exactly how he was going to win, exactly what round he'd knock out his opponent, exactly why he was the most beautiful and talented athlete they'd ever see. The crowds ate it up, loved him for his confidence, even when they hated him for his arrogance. But humility? What did humility mean for someone who'd spent years telling the world he was the greatest? The radiator hissed louder, and Clay opened his eyes to find that his vision was slightly blurred. Not from tiredness, but from tears he hadn't realized were forming. He wiped his face with the back of his free hand, careful not to disturb the book's position. Chapter 2, verse 201. Our Lord, give us good in this world and good in the next world, and save us from the punishment of the fire. Clay had never thought much about the next world. Boxing was about the present moment, about reaction time measured in milliseconds and power measured in pounds per square inch. Every fight was life or death compressed into 15 rounds or less, but it was always immediate, always right now. The next fight, the next opponent, the next paycheck. That was as far ahead as Clay had ever trained himself to think. But here was a book asking him to think beyond the next fight, beyond the next championship, beyond even his own life. To think about what kind of man he wanted to be when no one was watching, when there were no cameras or crowds or prize money. He thought about the times he'd been alone before, really alone, not just physically isolated, but spiritually adrift, after his first professional fight, sitting in a hotel room in Louisville with his victory check, wondering if this was all there was. After winning the Olympic gold medal, coming home to find that Jim Crow laws still applied to Olympic heroes. After beating Liston for the title, lying awake in Miami Beach hotels, wondering why being the best at something didn't make him feel like enough. Clay looked up from the book for the first time in nearly an hour. The room looked exactly the same ugly carpet, same institutional furniture, same view of Manhattan spreading out below. But something fundamental had shifted in the space between the bed and the desk. The air felt different, charged with possibility and terror in equal measure. He stood up, still holding the open book, his legs stiff from sitting in the too small chair. His reflection caught in the window, a young man in an undershirt and boxer shorts, holding a book like it was the most precious thing in the world. For a moment, Clay didn't recognize himself, not because he looked different, but because the person looking back seemed to be seeing something the old Cassius Clay had never seen. Outside the window, Manhattan stretched in all directions, millions of people sleeping in buildings he could barely see, each of them with their own names, their own identities, their own struggles between who they were and who they might become. Clay wondered how many of them had ever felt this particular kind of loneliness, the loneliness of being famous but not known, celebrated but not understood. He thought about Malcolm X, probably asleep in his own hotel room across town, probably dreaming about the revolution he believed was coming. Malcolm had seen something in Clay that Clay was only beginning to see in himself, not just a fighter who could win championships, but a voice that could speak to people who'd never had anyone speak for them. But that voice would need a different name. Clay returned to the desk and sat down again, turning to a page near the back of Quran. Chapter 112, titled Unity. Say, he is Allah, the One, Allah, the Eternal Absolute. He begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is none like unto him. The word seemed to echo in the small room, gaining power with each repetition in Clay's mind. Allah. The name felt foreign on his tongue, but familiar in his chest, like something he'd known before he had language to describe it. He tried pronouncing it aloud, quietly. Allah. The syllables felt substantial in his mouth, like something built to last. He flipped back to the pages he'd already read, finding verses that had particularly moved him. Chapter 3, verse 139. So do not weaken and do not grieve, and you'll be superior if you are true believers. Superior. The word jumped out at him, not because of pride or arrogance, but because of truth. Clay had spent his entire career claiming superiority based on his physical gifts, his speed, his power, his reflexes. But this was talking about a different kind of superiority, one based on something deeper and more permanent than athletic ability. Chapter 16, verse 97. Whoever does righteousness, whether male or female, while he is a believer, we will surely cause him to live a good life, and we will surely give them their reward according to the best of what they used to do. A good life. Clay had thought he was living a good life. Fame, money, women, respect, the admiration of millions. But sitting in this hotel room at 4 a.m, he realized he'd never felt more empty. All the external validation in the world couldn't fill the space inside him that had been waiting for something real to believe in. Muhammad Ali. The name came to him not like a revelation, but like a recognition, like remembering something he'd forgotten rather than learning something new. Muhammad, after the Prophet, who brought this book to the world. Ali, after the fourth Caliph, cousin and son-in-law to the Prophet, known for his courage and wisdom. Two names that carried the weight of history and faith, that connected him to something larger than boxing, larger than fame, larger than America itself. Clay, no, Ali, said the name aloud for the first time. Muhammad Ali. His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the hotel room it sounded like thunder. The name felt strange in his mouth. Unfamiliar syllables that would take practice to make natural. But underneath the strangeness was something else. Rightness, like putting on clothes that actually fit. He practiced it again, slightly louder. Muhammad Ali. And then again, Muhammad Ali. Each repetition made it feel more real, more his. He thought about how it would sound when ring announcers called it, how it would look on posters and in newspaper headlines. Would the press accept it? Would his fans? Would the boxing establishment that already made him rich and famous? And then he realized he didn't care. The clock read 4:23 a.m., and Ali. He was Ali now, he decided. Even if he was the only person in the world who knew it, realized that somewhere in the past hour, Cassius Clay had stopped existing. Not dramatically, not with fanfare or ceremony, but quietly, the way one season becomes another. Without anyone noticing the exact moment of transition, he closed the Quran gently and held it against his chest for a moment, feeling its weight and warmth. Tomorrow there would be questions from reporters, confusion from promoters, anger from fans who wanted their champion to stay exactly as he was. There would be legal battles over name change, political battles over what conversion meant, personal battles with family members who didn't understand. His trainer, Angelo Dundee, would worry about how this affected training camp discipline. His promoter would worry about ticket sales and television ratings. The boxing commission would worry about public relations and political pressure. Everyone who'd made money off Cassius Clay would have opinions about Muhammad Ali. But tonight, in room 1247 of the Park Sheraton, there was just a new man learning how to carry a new name. Ali stood up and walked back to bed, setting the Quran on the nightstand next to the untouched Gideon Bible. The contrast struck him. The Christian Bible thick and formal in its black binding, the Quran smaller, but somehow more personal in its worn blue leather. Two books, two paths, two different ways of understanding the same fundamental questions about how to live and what to believe. He lay down on top of the covers, still fully dressed, and closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, sleep came easily, and with the dreams of a future he couldn't quite see but somehow knew was waiting for him. When Muhammad Ali woke up 6 hours later, the first thought in his mind wasn't about boxing or fame or what anyone else might think. It was a simple prayer of gratitude for being alive to see another day, for having the strength to become who he was meant to be, and for the book on the nightstand that had shown him the way home. The man who opened his eyes that morning was physically identical to the one who closed them, but everything else had changed. The name, the faith, the purpose, all of it transformed in the span of a few hours with a book and the courage to let go of who he used to be. Muhammad Ali sat up, looked at the Quran on the nightstand, and smiled. The real fight